September 19th, 1937, 11:47 p.m. The air inside the Cotton Club hung thick with smoke and the smell of expensive cologne mixed with bootleg gin. Bumpy Johnson sat at table 14, third row from the stage, his back to the wall. He wore a charcoal suit that cost $42 more than most Harlem families earned in a month. His hands rested flat on the white tablecloth. He hadn't touched his drink. Across the room, 3 men in Italian silk moved through the crowd like they owned it, because according to every agreement written and unwritten in New York City since 1931, they did. Charles Lucky Luciano had sent them. The message was simple. Bumpy owed them $32,000, his cut from the numbers racket he'd been running in Harlem for the past 8 months. The Italians had brokered the peace. They'd given him territory, and now they wanted what was theirs. By 6:15 the next morning, 4 bodies would be found in 3 different boroughs. The entire power structure of Harlem's underworld would fracture. And the Italian mob would learn something about Bumpy Johnson that no amount of money or muscle could have prepared them for. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of kneeling.
The 3 men reached his table at 11:52 p.m. The one in front, Salvatore Maranzano's nephew, a kid named Vincent with slicked hair and a gold watch, didn't sit down. He stood close enough that Bumpy could smell the garlic on his breath. Vincent said the number, 32,000. He said it loud enough that 2 tables heard it. Bumpy didn't look up. He lifted his glass, took 1 sip of water, and set it back down in the exact same wet ring it had left on the table. That silence lasted 8 seconds. To understand what happened next, you need to understand Harlem in 1937. Not the Harlem of tourist brochures or jazz records. The Harlem where every street corner was a chessboard and every player knew the cost of a wrong move. The neighborhood stretched from 110th Street to 155th, river to river. 400,000 people crammed into 150 blocks. 70% of them were black. 90% of the wealth was controlled by white mobsters downtown. The numbers racket was the heartbeat of it all. Every day, thousands of residents placed bets on a 3-digit number derived from the daily stock exchange figures or racetrack results. A nickel bet could return $30. For people working 14-hour shifts as elevator operators or dishwashers, it was the only lottery they had.
By 1936, the numbers game in Harlem was generating $40 million a year. Not profit, revenue. $40 million moving through barbershops, beauty parlors, and basement speakeasies. And until 1935, it had all been controlled by black operators. Madame Stephanie St. Clair, Casper Holstein, men and women who'd built the infrastructure from nothing, who knew every player, every cop, every politician. Then the Italians came. Lucky Luciano didn't ask permission. He sent soldiers. He bought police captains. He made it clear that any numbers banker who didn't pay tribute would be found in the Hudson River with their pockets full of stones. Most folded. Casper Holstein took a beating that put him in the hospital for 9 days and decided retirement looked appealing. Madame St. Clair went to war for 6 months, lost 3 of her best runners to bullets, and finally negotiated a partnership that was really just surrender with a salary. Bumpy Johnson was 31 years old when the Italians made their move. He'd been arrested 12 times, convicted twice. He'd spent 4 years in Sing Sing for armed robbery and came out with a reputation for 2 things. He never snitched and he never forgot. When Luciano's men came to Bumpy in January of 1937, they offered him a deal. He could keep running his operation in North Harlem, 130th to 145th. In exchange, he'd pay 30% off the top to the Maranzano family. Protection, access, peace. Bumpy took the deal, shook hands at a restaurant on Mulberry Street, smiled for the first and only time that night. For 8 months, he paid. Every week, on Thursday, a man named Tony Rizzo would meet Bumpy at a diner on Lenox Avenue. Bumpy would hand over an envelope. Tony would count it at the table, tuck it into his coat, and leave without ordering food. $32,000. That's how much Bumpy had paid in total by September of 1937. And then he stopped.
No explanation, no warning. The Thursday before September 19th, Tony Rizzo sat at that diner for 40 minutes. Bumpy never showed. Tony called his boss. His boss called Vincent, and Vincent decided to handle it personally. That's how we end up back at table 14 in the Cotton Club, 11:52 p.m. Vincent standing, Bumpy sitting, the silence stretching. Vincent leaned in. He put one hand on the back of Bumpy's chair. In a voice just above a whisper, he said the mobsters downtown weren't asking anymore. They were telling. And if Bumpy didn't have the money by Sunday, they'd take it out of his skin. Bumpy set his glass down. He looked at Vincent for the first time. His face was stone. No anger, no fear. Nothing. He stood up, adjusted his tie, buttoned his jacket, and he walked out of the Cotton Club without saying a single word. Vincent laughed, loud enough that the band stopped playing for half a bar. He told his boys Bumpy was scared, that he'd have the money by Sunday, that Harlem was theirs. He was wrong on all 3 counts. What Vincent didn't know was that Bumpy had spent 8 months doing something more valuable than paying tribute. He'd been watching. He knew that Tony Rizzo picked up money from 7 different operators every Thursday. He knew the route. He knew Tony stopped at his mistress's apartment on 142nd Street every week at 3 p.m. before making his rounds. He knew Tony's car, a black Buick Roadmaster with a dent in the rear fender, was parked in the same garage off Amsterdam Avenue every single night.
He knew that Vincent had a cousin who ran a card game in the back of a butcher shop on 125th Street. He knew the cousin owed a bookie $500. He knew the bookie worked for Bumpy. Most importantly, Bumpy knew something the Italians had forgotten. Harlem wasn't just another neighborhood to control. It was a kingdom, and kingdoms don't bow to invaders. They outlast them. At 2:30 a.m. on September 20th, Tony Rizzo's car was found on the Triborough Bridge, engine running, driver's seat empty. The envelope with that week's collections, $11,000 in cash, was still on the passenger seat. Tony's body was found 3 days later in the Bronx. The police report listed cause of death as blunt force trauma. No suspects, no witnesses. On September 22nd, Vincent's cousin was beaten unconscious outside his card game. He survived, but the message was clear. The $500 debt? Forgiven. But the cousin closed the game permanently and moved to New Jersey.